The years were 2016 through 2019. During that season, we continued at Gateway Church for the first part of that season, and then we also ventured out after that, and we went to Centricity. They allowed us to use their building a couple times for our worship events. Redemption City in Franklin allowed us to use their building for an event, and then we also had one event at Grace Chapel in Leapers Fork, which was our second conference. So my sister, Mary Beth Dodd, moved to Nashville, and it was the first time as adults that we got to be in the same town. So it was a very exciting time for us personally. But I remember having conversations with her around the kitchen table about how all of these things we were experiencing as female writers, she had also experienced and others have been experiencing as female worship leaders. And we had a conversation about combining efforts and what would that look like. How could we do that in a way that would combine the worship leader and the songwriter? And she would bring the leader piece, I would bring the writer piece, and we decided to try it. And so we had a conversation about names. We decided to sort of bring Girls Right Out underneath the umbrella of that name, and we would also bring in then some worship leaders. So we chose the name Brave Worship, and that's how Brave Worship got its name. Right here at our kitchen table, and it was an awesome new season. We changed up the format of the events a little bit. Our reach changed just a little bit because of that, and Mary Beth brought a great new perspective and a new opportunity to our world, really, in reaching those worship leaders. And so as we launched, we actually also launched a podcast, and that was one of the most favorite things I've done with Mary Beth in that season was that podcast, and that's continued to this day and will continue to grow and change. But it was birthed during that season. We had so many laughs on that podcast. We had so much fun, and it really widened our reach as a ministry as well. I learned a lot about how we could grow in unexpected ways. I learned that, and how beautiful that was. I also learned we learned a lot about faith. So it was the first time during that season that we took a trip internationally. And I remember having the phone call with Denise Hughes and talking about what it was going to take and saying, yes, we have at least 13 writers that want to go. I had a list of probably 60, but then actually getting those writers to commit to going, it took a lot of faith. It was kind of scary. I didn't know what was going to happen. And we did a lot of fundraising. We did a lot of, things to make that possible for everybody. But the yes before the actual, proof, that was a brand new thing. That was a big yes for us as a ministry to say yes. And we exponentially grew in our faith. And I think that's something we still carry to this day for sure. In future, events and endeavors, even things we're looking at now that we'll share soon. Those yeses, which now looking back seem small, really gave us the faith to say yes to bigger things. So we continued to maintain those, same group of people really that were coming in person. Around 72, I think, was the most we had during the season. But we really grew in listeners on our podcast. So we would have, I think, 500 listeners. And then we also grew in our online reach during this season. So more and more continued growth online. The very first conference that we ever did really came out of a conversation again with Mary Beth, and just wanting to gather those people in person that we were meeting online, because we saw that growth online, but we wanted to see them face to face. And so we were able to put together our first Brave conference. It was the fall of 2016, and we held it at Gateway Church, and we did a walkthrough experience where the women, encountered basically this whole trail of Jesus meeting with a different person in each of the rooms, a different woman, and what that meant for them. And through that walkthrough experience, we actually had someone get healed. It was a beautiful celebration, and actually, because of the Facebook ads for that conference, we met a couple of our people that we cannot imagine now having Brave without, and that's Amanda Blankenship and Rachel Thomas. We met through that Facebook ad for that conference. But it was a beautiful gathering, and we continued in growth. And after the conference, Mary Beth and I launched Brave Besties, which was a coffee community. Basically, it was a coffee club. People would get on once a week, and we would host a conversation and coffee with whoever got on that day. And we really grew a lot that day as well. Little did we know that several of those people would end up moving to our area a few years later. But we also hosted conference number 2 during the season as well. And that was at Grace Chapel in Leapers Fork. And we did another walkthrough experience. We had a theme of cast your net wider than your belief. That's exactly what we had to do with that trip. It was an amazing, beautiful conference again, and gathered even more together than we ever had in that second conference. So we went to hear Ray Hughes in town. He was speaking here locally, really from a suggestion from a friend, Don Finn, who was close with Ray Hughes. We went to hear him speak, and we were overwhelmed and blown away. And all the things that he was saying about Scotland and Ireland and Wales, we were stirred up even more, and wanted to learn more about the history and the culture and worship, and how it started over there, and what it was like. And basically ended up asking Ray, hey, would you take us over for a trip? Could we do a trip as Brave Worship? And had a conversation with him after one of those nights. And really, it felt like a far-fetched possibility, but it became a reality. And Ray led our trip, both of our trips that we did actually, but during that season it was the Scotland trip, and then we did later the Ireland trip, both with Ray Hughes. And I didn't know what I would learn personally from my family history and how that would impact me as a leader. And several other people learned about their family histories, but I didn't expect to see our growth in our relationships. That's what blew me away. And some things you can learn and grow here when you're at home, but when you're away from kids and away from work and all of those things, and Lord knows it is a miracle to get women away from all of those things. We saw many miracles that happen in order for people just to go on these trips, financially, work-wise, personally, many levels. But we also got to see breakthroughs on the other side of that, person after person after person. Breakthroughs, and then an unbreakable bond that will never be broken from this point forward, from the girls that went on those trips together. We also did some writing days, and that was really fun. Just coming back, and actually before we left on the trips, we did some writing together, but we wrote on the trips and we did writing days when we got back. Just continuing that flow of relationship and community. We also started Brave Brothers during this season, and I think that was really birthed out of having a brother on our trip, Bob Blankenship, and just him seeing the vision and agreeing in his spirit with the vision, and kind of wanting to gather the men like the women were being gathered. And this is really the first that you'll see, and there's more to come, of us really opening our hearts to men. And they came home and they really began to support us even more they were before, as far as the tech side of things, and sound and audio and prayer and all of those things that we really needed. It just was beautiful to have them come around us and surround us. Many of them were husbands to the Brave girls, and we began to become really aware of the men that were surrounding and supporting us. So when we came back from Scotland, the girls were saying, we want to keep writing, and they wanted to learn more about writing worship. And so I felt like I could share something with them. And again, it goes back to be what you need. I knew what they needed because I had felt it. And so I came home and began writing really just a week at a time. And then there were 12 girls that were chosen to be part of that pilot group. And I felt like 12 was a significant number because that was the number of disciples. So that's what we did, a smaller group. And we had 3 flying in from different states to be a part of those bi-weekly events. And I'd write a week, and then I'd teach a week, and they'd all come and learn, and then we would break out into co-writing groups. And it was really the foothills of the mentorship. And we would do that. We did it for 8 weeks until I felt like it was done. And at the close of that, we then had really this whole plan for the mentorship. But what I didn't also realize was that I was sort of laying the groundwork also for the book. How would I summarize season 3? I would say expansion and faith and resources are the 3 main things that I see that came out of season 3. So expansion, expanding to men, expanding to worship leaders during that season, expanding literally to another country, other countries, territory, and expanding online. And then faith, man, our faith grew exponentially during this season. The trips, the conferences, trusting God that we'd be able to cover our own expenses, and trusting that He would be there to give us our next step while we were still midair with our foot. So the saying yes before the proof, all of those things happened during those seasons. And then the resources, that was a huge piece that came during this season. And of course, the mentorship was born during the season, and also the songwriter personality test. But really, the groundwork was laid for many of our future resources we couldn't even see yet.